Hello everybody, it's Tony Funk, and I'm back to this 3-part series on why Dragon Ball GT was better than Z and Super. It's been a long wait, so without further ado, let's just jump right into it and explore the qualities that make GT an effective finale to the Dragon Ball franchise. So I decided to split, this final video into kind of 3 major overarching parts. So part 1 is coming full circle. The Dragon Ball franchise's story is often called a loose adaptation of Journey to the West, which rings true for the first few sagas of Dragon Ball, but quickly goes in an uncertain direction. We all understand that Dragon Ball is about Goku's martial arts journey, but for fuck's sakes, guys, it's also about the Dragon Balls. Their resultant use as a deus ex machina meant that the gathering of the balls, the summoning of the dragon, and the importance of the lore and its implications are largely glanced over. I'm not just talking out of my ass, I only do that when I do Ace Ventura impressions, you know what I'm saying? But nobody questions the ethical ascriptions of, say, collecting all of the Dragon Balls, stashing them, and using them as a prize during a birthday party, Kinda not ethical if you ask me. And while I understand Dragon Ball is only a kid's manga made by a man who only wanted to see Japanese kids smile, but the fact that Dragon Ball GT addresses the repercussions, albeit unrealistic, but we'll get into that later, of using the Dragon Ball so liberally to further the main character's agenda shows that the writers of GT were considering grounding the story and connecting back to Dragon Ball more than Toriyama ever did. So y'all remember this thing from part 1? Yeah. The writers of GT actually used this fucking thing. And hold on to your hat, cowboy. I know you're probably about to type up some quip about why GT was still dull with clunky dialogue and shitty fights. And you know what? I'm gonna have to agree with you, which is why I will only be looking at the narrative of GT, not so much the fights, because honestly, they don't progress the narrative at all. My argument here is quite simple. GT was better than the Buu saga and Super combined because it had a superior story and not because it was more, air quotes, entertaining to watch. I'll be the first to admit that GT's a drag because of the clunky dialogue and the roundabout fights. So having said all that, let's analyze the story arc elements that GT employs to cap off the Dragon Ball series as a grounded, solid, and consequential story that not only is a solid story on its own, but also wraps up the entire Dragon Ball franchise. Bookending is a really important element of coming full circle. So we're going to be looking at what bookending is as a narrative tool and how Dragon Ball GT uses it. Let's start off with the worst element that GT used to call back to Dragon Ball, just to get it out of the way. The return of Kid Goku. For the whole series, this terrible, terrible idea came from a good place. According to Kanzenshu's forum, and more specifically, Abed, the Namekian warrior, and even more specifically this old archived website called Dragon Ball GT, Perfect File, Frequently Asked Questions containing exclusive information from the guidebooks. So, according to this, the reason why the writers chose to make Goku a child was because Dragon Ball largely focused on Goku's growth as a martial artist, and since Goku was the apex predator, so to speak, after killing Majin Buu, there really wasn't anywhere for him to go. So they made him a kid again and nerfed his instant transmission or instantaneous movement, whatever the fuck you want to call it, among other subtle handicaps. Now, I absolutely cannot pretend that Goku was nerfed in a significant way as far as fighting prowess goes, because the only noticeable differences we see are, slightly worse stamina decrease when transforming into Super Saiyan 3, and bar for the instant transmission, that's about it. However, if we want to believe the writers, the power nerf was in fact there. Now personally, though the execution was pretty bad, I do believe it makes more sense to nerf Goku after the death of Majin Buu than to continuously introduce characters that could beat Buu. Think about it. In Resurrection F, which I know was Z/Super, we hear that King Cold had warned Frieza about Majin Buu and Beerus, 2 characters that weren't conceived until after the introduction of Frieza, who was already thought to have been the most powerful entity in the universe. Well, now that Super has come along, King Cold's warning now has to include the multiverse elites such as Jiren, Toppo, and Dispo, the other 11 gods of destruction, all the angels, the Grand Priest, Zeno, Hit, and now Moro. Obviously, King Cold has no reason to know the whereabouts of these other fucking characters, right? But regardless, you get my point. Also, why the fuck did the Kais never mention Moro until the Moro arc came around? Right, because Dragon Ball Super did not try to be a story whatsoever. It tried to be whatever the plot needed it to be. And that, my friends, is not a story. It's an anthology of progressively crazier what-ifs. So, back to GT. How do you make challenges for the hero to continue his or her journey when he or she runs out of challenges? That's right, you handicap the motherfucker. I suppose the only other way is to create new challenges instead of conjuring them up from thin air. See where I'm going with this? But whoa. Before I talk about the creation of new challenges in GT, just let me finish my rant about Kid Goku. Kid Goku was not only a clever way to bridge the gap between his jabroni enemies of the Black Star Dragon Ball saga, but he served to include a literary technique known as bookending. Let's explore this technique a little further and see what makes it profound for a story as convoluted as Dragon Ball. Bookending is a narrative tool usually associated with literature, speeches, and periodicals, but has widespread use in many applications. According to Embedded.com collaborator Ron Green, bookending, using bookends, is powerful because it accomplishes several things at once. First, the opening is designed to catch the interest of the audience and tends to draw more people in. Second, it instills the narrative with an emotional quality, so the reader becomes invested in the outcome. Bookending also lends symmetry to the overall piece, giving it a neat and well-formed structure. And most importantly, bookends allow you to close with a strong and satisfying finish. End quote. Now, having said that, remember how disappointed everybody was in the ending of Dragon Ball Z? You know the reason why that is? The end of Dragon Ball Z bookended the Buu saga instead of the entire franchise. We know this because before Buu's demise, Goku wished for Buu to return as a better person to have the opportunity to have a rematch with him. Aside from that, we also see the completion of Vegeta's character arc before Super and GT are introduced, of course. So by the time we get to see this time skip, and we prepare to conclude the entirety of the Dragon Ball series, we're primed to see what Goku's journey culminates to, and we ask ourselves, on what note can we end the series to finally close the manga? Or, turn the TV off, whatever mediums you're using. All without feeling like this story ended up going nowhere. Instead, what we got was a bookend for just the Buu saga. The beginning of this epilogue mimicked the beginning of the Buu saga, with exception of the, celebratory party, blah blah blah, after Buu was defeated. So we got to see Goku enter the 28th World Martial Arts Tournament, much like 10 years prior. This mirroring was effective in wrapping up the saga without a doubt, because it took us back to the familiarity of the tournament that kicked off the Buu saga. It's symmetrical. It's like a mirror. Or as George Lucas says,
like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one.
After Goku realizes Oob is Buu incarnate and decides to train him, we're left dissatisfied in seeing that the story finishes in an, inconclusive and seemingly inconsequential way. Sure, we can assume Oob will take up Goku's mantle of protector of the Earth, but we never learn any lessons whatsoever once the series concludes. We're simply left to assume that Oob will carry on Goku's adventures, and that's pretty much about it. No moral, no epiphany, no final character growth. And yeah, you could make the argument that Goku goes from being the student to being the master, but that's literally the only sign that Goku has gone full circle. And you see, this ending has had more consequences than meets the eye, because prior to Super and during the time of GT's rejection by fans, for not being canon and all, you could ask anyone what the entire story of Dragon Ball was about, and they would pretty much say something like, Goku and his friends fight progressively stronger bad guys until the series ends. Yeah, so correct me if I'm wrong, but even to this day, that is like the most common summary for Dragon Ball. No story, no plot, just a whole bunch of bad guys. So compare this with, say, another Shonen Jump series, like, One Piece. What is One Piece about? Sure, I could say it's about Luffy and his friends fighting progressively stronger bad guys, but there's a One Piece to be found that makes every fight relevant. One Piece is about the fucking One Piece, and because of that, everything Luffy goes through is impactful and moves the story forward. Dragon Ball, on the other hand, every fight feels pointless, because at the end of the day, the only thing that's going to get accomplished is the end of the saga and a short period of peace right after that will inevitably get interrupted. We've seen the show. We know how this fucking works. So I mean, does it really feel satisfying seeing the same rinse and repeat formula over and over again when there's no end goal at hand? I don't know about you, but as soon as the Dragon Ball saga ends, I just think to myself, I wonder what Toriyama's gonna pull out of his ass next. No offense to the legend, I fucking love Toriyama. But it's fucking true, guys. So, to answer my own question in a roundabout way, making Goku a kid again sets us up for a series bookending. By mirroring the beginning of Dragon Ball in GT, by having an adventure with Kid Goku, and instead of Bulma, Yamcha, and Oolong, we have Giru, Pan, and Trunks, we are able to contrast the development that occurred throughout Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, and juxtapose it with a similar setting and plotline. This causes the beginning of GT to feel like a combination of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, where we're excited to see how Goku manages to become an adult again. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. But he gets us thinking about a real consequential plot point that's connected to the Dragon Balls, just like the good old days. I mean, think about it. The Dragon Balls are relevant again as an integral part of the plot, and not just some MacGuffin once the plot has carried its course. I keep saying this, but that first saga of GT really had us feeling like we were watching a 1988 Dragon Ball fan fiction or something, which is awesome. Understandably, it rubbed those who were accustomed to Dragon Ball Z the wrong way though, and that first saga garnered negative reviews. Could the execution have done better? Yippers, it definitely could have. But it had the balls to challenge the directionless storytelling of Dragon Ball Z. You can't deny the balls here, guys. But okay, Tony, fine. Kid Goku made us recall Dragon Ball and made us realize how much the series had changed since then. Is that it? Is that why, GT was better? Because of the callbacks? And I say to you people, the callbacks are crucial to concluding an epic story. But like I briefly touched before, aside from the bookending power of callbacks, GT found a way to tell a compelling story without having to inject new lore. And that leads me to my second point. Pragmatic storytelling. You know what pragmatic means, right? It means logical. You know what's not logical? Continuously stating that the current bad guy is the strongest in the universe has ever seen, and then introducing someone even stronger the following arc. That is not fucking pragmatic. The writers of GT knew this, and they knew that in order to make a story more consequential, they needed to connect the sagas to past lore to make us feel like we didn't waste our time watching everything that came before. And, that's where Baby comes in. Baby, as, we all know or should know, is a member of the Tuffle race, which co-inhabited with the Saiyans on planet Plant. Though, the Tuffles were never canon, we see the writers of GT incorporate already existing lore and using it to create a legitimate motivation for a villain arc. This, I feel, makes more sense than introducing a random space entity that wants to rule the universe. You know what they say? A story is only as good as its villain. And when you can sympathize, or at least, understand the villain's motivation, one becomes more invested in the conflict. Compare how you felt about Moro versus how you felt about Granola. Personally, I had no reason to either like or dislike Moro, and since his backstory is lightly mentioned and connected to the Kais, it made me very apathetic towards him. Granola, on the other hand, pisses me off, man. He really does. Because I have a connection to him knowing that he is exacting revenge on the Saiyans for destroying his homeworld. And the thing that pissed me off about him so much was his refusal to acknowledge the fact that Vegeta and Goku are good Saiyans, before we get the Bardock reveal, of course. So me being pissed off with Granola is a win for Toriyama, because he gave me enough reason to connect with him, enough to care about his behavior, and enough to be pissed off about it. Moro was just an annoying bad guy that materialized out of thin air, Okay. So back to Baby. Baby had his reasons to exterminate the Saiyans, and as such, everything else we have learned about the Saiyans prior to Baby seemed relevant. We are rewarded for having watched the series long enough to finally address the crimes of the Saiyans, and see how the universe comes to terms with their past sins. This theme will be revisited again, by the way. But anyway, not only is Baby's origin story connected to the rest of the lore we've built up all these years, but the reason he becomes so powerful is also related to past lore. You see, we do get to see why Baby is a menace. Since the Saiyan saga, we've experienced Vegeta's growth as a martial artist and witnessed every drop of blood, sweat, and tears that developed him as the second most powerful warrior in the universe at that point in time. And Baby taking over Vegeta's body, we no longer have to roll our eyes and question how this entity became powerful enough to challenge the likes of Goku, because Baby does have a fighting history that we've been invested in for years. And yeah, that's Vegeta's history. And even the way in which Goku is able to defeat Baby is pretty pragmatic. I know. Goku fucks around most of the fight when he could have ended it a lot sooner. But the narrative use of the Saiyan's tale is a brilliant way to showcase why Goku has a leg up on Baby in their final fight. You see, after Gohan goes Ozaru in the Saiyan saga, we no longer see the tails on any of the Saiyans, and we simply forget, about the Saiyans' ape-like heritage. The focus on Saiyan biology shifts, from their primal roots to the tiered Super Saiyan system, which bears no resemblance to the Ozaru. It's almost like we're asked to forget about Goku's Monkey King resemblance and pretend he's a tailless humanoid with bleached hair forms. When you contrast the properties that sealed Goku's win in the Baby saga with, say, the properties that made Goku a better opponent for Cell than Vegeta in the Cell saga, you start noticing that the Cell saga starts to feel a lot more like a plot armor-based story. Like, think about it. Even after Vegeta learns about Goku's type of training in the Room of Spirit and Time, or Hyperbolic Time Chamber, he is still no match for Cell upon his return from his second training session. So that to me is a classic example of bad writing, because there is no pragmatic reason as to why Vegeta would not be able to bridge the gap between the two. None whatsoever, other than because Toriyama wanted to keep Vegeta out of the Cell games, and that's it. That's the only fucking thing I can think of. So the fewer times we have to say, in quotes, because plot armor, end quote, the better the story becomes. And in the Baby saga, it is Goku's Saiyan heritage that allows him to beat Baby. It is through Bulma's theory that we see a logical or pragmatic distinction between Goku's max power and Baby's max power. And that being that Baby Vegeta is incapable of going Super Saiyan 4 because he is not a pure-blooded Saiyan. I love this reason, because not only is it ironic that Baby needs to be a pure-blooded Saiyan to defeat the Saiyans, but also because we get to see just how important Saiyans' tails are as a defining feature of their race. This revisiting of the Ozaru, and the aesthetic markers of a Super Saiyan 4, gives us satisfying validation for having grown up seeing Goku with a tail, even if it disappears for more than half of the series. We also get a lesson from this. Originally, Goku was taught that by removing his tail, he could become more powerful by limiting his weak points. And at the time, that school of thought made plenty of sense. But in a dramatic turn of events, we later realized that the source of Goku's true Saiyan strength lies in the feature that defined him from the get-go. Quite poetic if you ask me. And yet another example of thematic bookending. It is through pragmatic writing that we see the introduction, rise, and fall of Baby, and all without questioning his motives, his power, and his defeat. Though I can't say I can check all those boxes for the Super 17 saga, I can say GT definitely tried, and kept things grounded enough without introducing more pointless lore. There are cons to the Super 17 saga due to unanswered questions, such as how Hellfighter 17 became so powerful, as well as other weird plot hole-filled shenanigans, such as the changing nature of Hell's rules. However, we can see that there was a legitimate attempt to make a cohesive story without stepping out of the bounds of the pre-established lore. Though the return of 17 wasn't expected, it was believable. We could suspend our disbelief that Miyu and Gero could build an android in Hell, and that Gero could find a way to brainwash 17. Nothing too crazy. And as far as the motivations go for creating Super 17, they seem to check out. This is like the third time androids were created to kill Goku, right? So yeah, what I like about this saga as far as storytelling goes is the emotional revisiting of Android 18's past and her current priorities as a mother. All the Hell stuff did seem like a gratuitous way to have a throwback to the villains, so I'm not going to applaud that because it just seemed way too easy to write something in like that and it felt boring and unearned. But regardless, I think the saga had good heart. Now, interestingly enough, my favorite part of this saga was the ending, when the gang attempt to summon Shenron and undo all of Miyu and Jiro's damage, like they typically do. But segue first. The third element here is consequences. So yeah, the gang gathers the Dragon Balls and realizes that all is not what it seems, as the Dragon Balls appear to be cracked, and instead of summoning Shenron, they summon the Black Smoke Dragon. Now this is ultimately the element that made me consider making this 3-part series in the first place. The aforementioned qualities of Dragon Ball GT were definitely refreshing in a series that kept itself too refreshing, if you know what I mean. Every saga was something completely different and something that we had never heard of. So the aspects of telling a circular story and going back to the beginning through bookending by creating parallel settings were pretty good ideas and kept GT from feeling like it was going to get out of control. And the writing, when it came to creating villains that made sense and weren't pulled out of thin air, was also pretty decent. The following saga, however, not only had both of those narrative elements, but it included a third element that cemented GT as an intelligently written conclusion to Dragon Ball. And what is that? That's right, a resolution. With some consequences, of course, but a resolution nonetheless. But not to the previous arc, to the whole series. Unlike Dragon Ball Z's ending, Dragon Ball GT's ending had a resolution for the entire series. Come on, that's pretty fucking cool, right? GT identified the recurring problem that kept showing up saga after saga and addressed it permanently. Goku has enemies that either want to kill him or take the Dragon Balls. We know this. So instead of defeating the enemy and using the Dragon Balls at the end, GT got rid of both Goku and the Dragon Balls, thus removing the two ubiquitous elements of Dragon Ball. Pretty fucking ballsy. So yeah. Let me explain what's so great about this saga. Everybody remember Endgame? Now, whether you liked Endgame more or less than Infinity War is up to you and kind of irrelevant. The fact of the matter is, what Endgame did was effectively conclude 22 or 21, depending on which movies you're counting, films, and gave a sense of finality to the entire MCU up until that point. So how exactly did they do that? Well, what they did was made us realize that though this universe was composed of standalone films, they all individually formed a fundamental foundation for everything that occurred in Endgame. The Russo brothers decided that in order to conclude the MCU's Phase 3, they needed to revisit old settings to contrast the character development of the current characters with their old counterparts. Though not every character's past was thoroughly explored or anything like that, but by using the narrative device of time travel, we were given an opportunity to feel like we were in a familiar setting that linked us back to the older movies, while at the same time juxtaposing a relevant plot line throughout. This makes those 22 or 21 movies seem even more relevant because Endgame validated every exposition and build-up that they provided. It more importantly highlighted the consequences of characters' actions in the past and how they affected the events in Endgame. From the beginning, we saw glimpses of the Infinity Stones without truly understanding their overall purpose. We also saw two leaders develop among all the heroes and become the face of the MCU and leaders of the Avengers. But by the time Endgame concluded, the Infinity Stones were destroyed from the current reality, and our two main characters of, the MCU, Tony Stark and Steve Rogers, were either dead or out of commission, thus giving us a sense of finality. And, this is what we call going full circle. But of course, you already knew that by now, so I think you all know where I'm going with this. Similarly, Dragon Ball GT accomplished the same exact thing in the Shadow Dragon saga. Instead of giving us a saga finale as a series finale, GT offered us the opportunity to ponder and question the merits of everything that had happened since the beginning of Dragon Ball. The exposition we got from King Kai about the negative energy, caused by the rapid overuse of the Dragon Balls, caused us to reflect on the very first saga of Dragon Ball with Oolong's Wish. This is something that is unheard of in Dragon Ball Super, where the events of Dragon Ball are so far removed from the godlike powers and overpowered deities that make the Dragon Balls look like child's play. What the fuck does Pilaf have to do with Beerus or Jiren or Moro? Nothing. Which is why Dragon Ball Super forgot it is the third installment of an epic story and pretended to just be some never-ending circle jerk of bad writing and ever more powerful beings. The disconnect between Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Super is so huge at this point, it's embarrassing having to explain the plot of the trilogy, because there's nothing to explain. There is no plot. Contrast this with GT, and then we can say that Dragon Ball is the story of a group of heroes forced to use magical orbs to solve major world catastrophes, and they also have to reap the consequences of bending the rules for the greater good. Much more cohesive explanation for the Dragon Ball franchise, if you ask me. Okay, I digressed a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, when King Kai gave us this reason for the creation of the Shadow Dragons, Bulma is blamed for the creation of the Dragon Radar. And then, we kind of start to fondly recall the unraveling mystery of the Dragon Balls piece by piece from the very beginning. The Dragon Balls were originally revered to such an importance that gathering them took an entire saga, and only those who knew about their existence venerated them for their properties. As time went by, their relevance diminished, and their use became a deus ex machina that rubbed everybody the wrong way. Why watch Dragon Ball if most characters suffer no consequences for their actions? Why care about the next villain if we know their damage will be magically undone at the end of the arc, and so on and so forth? The introduction of the Namekian Dragon Balls also added to the further lack of consequences. Now we were really rolling our eyes. We have 2 sets of Dragon Balls now. What could possibly go wrong? So Dragon Ball essentially became a joke in terms of its narrative, and it seemed like the series would continue on a runaway shit show. But by not only adding consequences at the end of GT, but rather attributing consequences to every time the Dragon Balls were used as a deus ex machina, GT was able to ground the series and give us a slow but satisfying payoff. Every saga, from Dragon Ball to GT, had relevance again, and every wish made came back to haunt the gang. Eventually, not at that moment, but on our second viewing, we would all be anticipating that. That's what I love so much about the writing in GT. It grounds the series, and no matter how crazy and far-fetched shit got in Dragon Ball Z, and in GT, the Dragon Balls were given their due respect and were retroactively made to be the center of the story. Every Shadow Dragon represented a wish, and if GT was better executed in canon, I know we'd all cringe every time we saw a wish being made on our second rewatching of the series. Everything would be so consequential, and people would see Dragon Ball in a completely different light as a series. It would be seen as the slow burn epic that takes us in wild directions, but at the end of the day gives us a lesson that ties every past adventure into one solid adventure. The true hero's journey of self-realization and sacrifice. Much like Endgame, GT gave us finality to the series. Once Goku, with help from everybody else, defeated Omega Shenron with a spirit bomb, we were told that in order for things to go back to normal, Goku was tasked to leave for 100 years in order to sacrifice his life on Earth, as we know it at least, to use all his acquired power from every single battle he had fought to give us one last sacrifice for the good of the universe. Dragon Ball started with Goku and the Dragon Balls, and in GT, Dragon Ball ended with Goku and the Dragon Balls, becoming one, only to be never seen again, and thus concluding Goku's hero journey and the story of the Dragon Ball universe in one swift blow. Whether or not you enjoy GT as a show is a personal matter. GT's flawed as fuck, okay? It's boring in many parts, frustrating, dull, childish, and insults her intelligence at times. But as a whole, there's no denying that there will never be a better ending to the Dragon Ball franchise than what GT came up with. And I stand firmly behind that belief. GT gave us an answer to why we suffered alongside Goku, Bulma, Krillin, and later many more villains turned good, for so long. It was also that at the very end, Goku could turn one last evil being into a good being, and none other than the dragon himself. What poetic justice. Dragon Ball finally ended with one last wish to end all wishes, once and for all. Thanks guys very much for watching and sticking around for part 3. This was one of my favorite topics to talk about so far, and I appreciate your patience for waiting for its conclusion. As always, feel free to let me know what you thought about my take in the comments below. So what do you think? Is there a better way to end Dragon Ball than what GT did? Or am I justified in seeing the importance of concluding Goku's hero journey? Anyway guys, thanks, and I'll see yous down the road.